Washington, D.C., January 1896. A building is smoldering. It has been smoldering for 3 days. No alarm was raised on the first day, none on the second. And when the report finally reached the right desk on the third, the men who read it used a word that has appeared in every official account since: accidental. One word. And behind that word, gone 62,622,000. 250 individual population schedules. The most granular portrait of a nation ever assembled on paper. The only federal document that recorded the names, addresses, ages, parents' origins, and legal identities of the first generation of Americans born after slavery, gone. To understand why that word accidental has never been seriously challenged by any federal institution in 130 years, you have to go back to 1865, to the moment the United States decided it needed to count itself and began to realize, slowly, what that counting would prove. Because what this story is really about is not a fire. It is about what a name written on a government form is actually worth, and who, precisely, loses when that name disappears. It is about the distance between a completed fireproof vault and a wooden annex 30 yards away, and the order that was never written to close that distance. It is about the specific weight of paper, the specific logic of retrieval, and the specific people whose legal existence depended on both. And it is about the question that every archivist, every historian, every federal official with jurisdiction over this loss has declined for 130 years to ask out loud. The Civil War ended in April 1865. What it left behind was not peace, but arithmetic. 40 million acres of contested southern land, millions of people with no legal paper trail, no deed, no birth record, no document tethering their identity to a place or a family name. The federal government knew this. Francis Amasa Walker, the man who superintended the 1880 census, understood better than almost anyone that a nation's ability to count its people was also, quietly, its ability to define who those people legally were. Walker's 1880 enumeration was meticulous but slow. It took 8 years to fully process, hand-tabulated by clerks working in shifts, the data moving through the system at the pace of human fatigue. By the time Charles William Seton took over as Census Bureau Chief for the 1890 count, the technology had changed. Everything was about to become faster, more precise. And this is the part the official histories tend to skim past, more dangerous to certain entrenched arrangements of land and power. The instrument that made it dangerous was not a weapon, it was a card. A small, precisely dimensioned rectangle of paper that multiplied 62 million times became the most comprehensive legal archive a democratic government had ever accidentally built against itself. The people who understood what that archive contained and what it could do in a courtroom were watching closely. Some of them were in Congress. Some of them were on appropriations committees. Some of them signed documents, and some of them made sure certain documents were never signed at all. Herman Hollerith was 30 years old when he filed his patent in 1884. His invention was simple in principle and revolutionary in consequence. A punch card system that encoded individual data, 1 card per person, each card measuring exactly 3.25 inches by 7.375 inches, and allowed a mechanical tabulating machine to sort, count, and retrieve records at a speed no human team could match. For the 1890 census, Hollerith's machines processed 62 million individual records in under 3 years. The 1880 count, without machines, had taken 8. Speed alone would have been enough to mark this as a transformation. But the deeper change was retrieval. For the first time in American history, a government official could feed a query into a system and pull back every person of a given race, in a given county, born to parents from a given state, who had served in the Civil War. The 1,890 population schedules were not just a head count. They were a searchable, cross-referenceable archive of individual legal identity. The numbers survived the fire. A total count of 62,622,250 persons is still on record today, published in government bulletins that were distributed before the building burned. The numbers survived. The names did not. That is not how fires work. And the question of why the names vanished while the aggregate totals remained has never received a satisfactory institutional answer. Something about this does not add up. It has never added up. And the deeper you look, the more precisely the anomaly holds its shape. Robert P. Porter, who served as superintendent of the 1,890 census and oversaw Hollerith's implementation, published a report in 1891 celebrating the system's speed and accuracy. That report survives. The records it celebrated do not. The celebration is intact. The evidence is ash. Here is the irony that sits at the center of this story, and it is worth stating plainly. The 1,890 schedules were not erased because they were subversive. They were not propaganda, not revolutionary literature, not a manifesto. They were a census, a bureaucratic instrument of the most ordinary kind. They were erased because they were too useful. Specifically, they were useful to the wrong people. In the American South, between 1,865 and 1,896, land title was the central question of the post-war order. The Freedmen's Bureau, formerly the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands, had administered land redistribution programs that were subsequently reversed by presidential order, leaving hundreds of thousands of formerly enslaved families in legal limbo. Farming land they had been promised, holding no deed, watched by white landowners who claimed the same soil. The Bureau's own records, cataloged today in National Archives Record Group 105, list these contested parcels with names attached, black family names, farm coordinates, county designations. The 1,890 census schedules were the only federal document that could corroborate those Bureau records at the individual level, linking a specific person to a specific address on a specific farm, with their parents' origins recorded alongside, creating what amounted to a chain of title argument in documentary form. 40 million acres were still in legal dispute when the census was taken. The only document that could settle them burned overnight. The pattern suggests this was not coincidence. The evidence invites a harder question. And that harder question is one that no court, no commission, and no federal archive has ever formally put to itself in writing. That silence, institutional, durable, spanning administrations of every political character is itself a data point. It belongs in the record. Consider what the schedules actually looked like as physical objects. Each sheet was a large ruled-page government-issue paper with a specific grain and weight, printed with column headers in black ink, filled in by an enumerator's hand using whatever pen or pencil they carried into a farmhouse or a tenement apartment or a rural cabin in 1890. The handwriting varied by county and by enumerator, some entries precise and clerkly, others hurried, slanted, abbreviating names with the impatience of someone covering 20 households before dark. Each sheet captured a household's entire composition, every name, every age, every relationship, every birthplace. For black families in the South, this was often the first time their full household structure had been recorded in a federal document as free persons with legal standing. The texture of those pages, the slight ridge of dried ink, the occasional water stain from a river crossing completed in rain, the cramped margin notation where an enumerator recorded a correction contained the material residue of 62 million lives organized into a navigable system. When the building burned, what burned was not data in the abstract. It was paper. Specific weighted textured paper, in stacks, in boxes, in wooden shelving units inside a wooden annex heated by coal. The fire found those conditions ideal, and those conditions had been in place, unaltered, for 6 years. 6 years during which the schedules sat exposed and unprotected, while the people responsible for their safety filed reports and attended meetings and did not move them. 6 years is not an oversight. 6 years is a policy. W.E.B. Du Bois noticed the absence almost immediately. In 1899, when Du Bois published The Philadelphia Negro, the first systematic sociological study of an African-American urban community, his footnotes contain something that historians of the era rarely discuss. Explicit placeholders where the 1,890 individual schedules should have been. Du Bois needed those schedules to trace family migration, property continuity, and occupational history across generations. Without them, he was forced to reconstruct demographic patterns from church rolls, employer ledgers, and neighborhood interviews, methodological workarounds that produced real knowledge, but could not produce the kind of legally anchored evidence that a court would accept. He didn't accuse anyone. He noted the absence and moved around it. But the fact that a scholar working in 1899, just 3 years after the fire, already treated the loss as a structural methodological obstacle rather than a recent administrative accident tells you something about how the loss was perceived by those who understood what had actually vanished. He didn't say it was sabotage. He didn't have to. The shape of his silence around the subject is its own form of documentation. It tells you that among the people who understood what the schedules contained, there was a shared recognition, unspoken, unwritten, that the loss was not random. Du Bois spent the rest of his career working around a wall that the federal government built and then officially forgot it had built. He mapped the outline of the missing data in every study he produced for 40 years afterward. The outline is still there, in his footnotes, for anyone who knows how to read an absence. The fire itself happened on the 10th of January, 1896. The schedules had been stored in a Commerce Department building annex a wooden structure with coal-burning heating units where they had sat for 6 years. Congressional Appropriations hearing records from 1897 confirm that the fire smoldered for 3 days before it was formally reported to the appropriate officials. 3 days. In those 3 days, the wooden structure and everything inside it reduced to ash and char. The detail that the 1,897 hearings noted but did not pursue is this. A fireproof vault had been authorized and funded in 1895. Construction was complete. The vault was ready. The order to transfer the schedules from the wooden annex to the completed vault was never issued. No record of that order exists. No record of a decision not to issue it exists either. The vault was ready. The order to move the records was never given. That gap between a completed protective structure and the records that never entered it is the administrative silence at the heart of this story. And administrative silences, unlike archival fires, do not happen by themselves. They require someone in a position of authority to make no decision at all, to let a deadline pass, to leave a transfer order unsigned on a desk, to file an inspection report in a drawer and close the drawer. The hearings of 1,897 produced testimony, but no accountability. They produced a record of the loss without a record of the cause. That, too, is a shape. And the shape fits. The deeper fingerprint appears not in 1896, but in 1894. Congressional records from the 53rd Congress, specifically the Appropriations Subcommittee minutes for that session, show that a budget line item for census schedule preservation was removed from the final appropriations bill. The line item covered precisely the cost of transporting the 1,890 schedules from their existing storage location and housing them in fireproof facilities. Senator Francis Cockrell of Missouri sat on the committee that oversaw these decisions. The line items removal left 62 million paper records in a wooden building heated by coal 18 months before the fire. What makes this removal significant is not just what it did, but how it happened. There is no recorded debate. No committee member's objection appears in the minutes. No alternative was proposed. The line was struck, silently, from a public document that anyone could request and almost no one has examined since. Silence in a congressional record is not nothing. It is a shape. And the shape of this silence is the shape of a decision made by someone who understood exactly what they were deciding. The appropriations process is not accidental. Every line removed is removed by a hand attached to a name, and that name, in this case, has never been the subject of a formal historical inquiry. The subcommittee minutes are publicly available. They are sitting in the congressional record. They have been sitting there since 1894. No headline has been written about them. No inquiry has been opened. The document waits, patient and unread. In the archive, it was always intended to disappear inside. The timing requires attention. Plessy versus Ferguson, the Supreme Court case that enshrined legal racial segregation for the next 58 years, was argued in April 1896 and decided in May 1896. The fire was January 1896. Albion Tourget, the civil rights lawyer who argued the losing side of Plessy, had built his legal career on Reconstruction-era cases in which documentary evidence of black identity and property standing was central. The 1,890 schedules, had they survived, would have constituted the most robust federal evidentiary base ever assembled for exactly the kind of identity and property arguments that Tourget and others were making in Southern courts throughout the early 1,890 seconds. State court records from Louisiana and Mississippi show census schedules cited as evidentiary anchors in property disputes between 1,891 and 1,895. Those cases stalled after January 1896. Some were dismissed for lack of documentary support. No court on record formally requested the schedules from the federal government after the fire and received a written denial, which means the official record contains no moment at which a government official was required to put in writing that the records no longer existed. The sequencing of these events has never been examined in mainstream American legal history. The fire cleared the evidentiary field 4 months before the most consequential racial legal decision in American history was handed down. That sequencing does not prove intent, and it is a fact that has been sitting in plain sight, unasked about, for 130 years. At first, it looks like a coincidence, but the deeper you look, the more the coincidence accumulates detail. And accumulated detail is the opposite of coincidence. William Rush Merriam directed the 1900 census. His enumerator instruction manual, a published document still publicly available, reveals a redesign that is worth examining in specific detail. The 1,890 schedules had captured, for every individual, the birthplace of both parents. That field, in combination with race and county designation, was the mechanism that made genealogical reconstruction possible across the legal boundary of slavery. The 1900 census reduced this field's utility for African American households in several southern states. The Civil War veteran cross-reference, which had allowed researchers to link formerly enslaved men to military service records, and thus to another chain of legal identity, was eliminated as a standard cross-tabulation. The individual specificity of 1,890. The thing that made Hollerith's punch card system genuinely revolutionary as a legal instrument was architecturally dismantled in the next enumeration cycle. They didn't just burn the records. They redesigned the next ones. The 1,900 instruction manual reads, On its surface, as a routine administrative update, but every field removed is a question that can no longer be asked. And the questions removed were precisely the questions that mattered most to the people who had the most to gain from asking them. The redesign did not announce itself as a suppression. It announced itself as an efficiency improvement. That is how institutional erasure typically works. Not as a declaration, but as a revision, a simplification, a modernization that happens to remove exactly what needed removing. The 1900 census was not the end of the story. The mechanism of what is called accidental destruction, examined closely, is not random. For an archival fire in this era to consume an entire collection, 4 conditions must be simultaneously present: flammable storage material, approximate heat source, the absence of suppression protocol, and a delay in official reporting. All 4 conditions were present on the 10th of January, 1896. What is less commonly noted is that Commerce Department building inspection reports from the period between 1891 and 1895 flagged at least one concern about heating proximity to paper storage in the annex where the schedules were held. No corrective action followed. Herbert Putnam, who became Librarian of Congress in 1899 and oversaw the early standardization of federal archival practice for 4 decades, never commissioned a retrospective examination of the 1,890 loss. The question that no one in his institution formally asked is whether the inspection reports flagging the storage conditions were routed through the same administrative office that 18 months before the fire quietly removed the budget line for transferring the schedules to safer housing. Someone read the inspection, someone filed it, someone did nothing, and the chain of custody for that decision, who received the report, who was responsible for acting on it, who chose not to, has never been reconstructed by any federal body. That reconstruction would require only what is already publicly available. It has simply never been attempted by anyone with institutional authority to act on what they found. The official explanation is accidental. The evidence is consistent with something else. Historians have not explained why those 2 things are not in greater tension with each other. And then there is the fragment. In Perry County, Missouri, a partial set of 1,890 population schedules survived. Approximately 6,160 names individuals enumerated in a single Missouri county exist today in handwritten form, cataloged by the National Archives as microfilm publication M407. They survived because they were never returned to the federal building. The working explanation is bureaucratic misfiling. The Perry County schedules were apparently retained in a state courthouse annex, separated from the federal collection before the January 1896 fire, and not recovered by the federal inventory system until they were later identified and cataloged by genealogical researchers. The National Archives catalog entry acknowledges their existence and their anomalous survival without providing a formal account of how they left federal custody. No official explanation has ever been recorded. The fragment was invisible to the destruction because it was invisible to the system. What the Perry County fragment reveals, more than anything else, is the inventory looseness of the federal collection before the fire schedules moving between county officials and federal custodians. Without rigorous tracking, custody chains documented imprecisely the physical location of millions of pages, known only approximately at any given moment. That looseness is exactly the kind of condition that would allow destruction to proceed without a precise accounting of what had been lost. And it is exactly the kind of condition that would allow other fragments to exist, undetected, in county courthouses and state archive annexes across the country today. Genealogical researchers have spent decades working around the 1,890 gap using every available substitute source, city directories, church registers, military pension files, state tax rolls, insurance maps that recorded household addresses by street number. Each of these sources provides a partial silhouette of the person who should appear in the 1890 schedules. None of them provides what the schedules provided: a single federal document, legally authoritative, linking a name to an address, to a family structure, to a place of origin. The substitute sources are not equivalent. They were never meant to be. If one fragment survived by accident, the question is not whether others exist. It is whether anyone has been paid to look. And the answer to that question, across 130 years of federal archival administration, is no. In 1934, Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the National Archives Act, establishing for the first time a permanent federal institution with professional responsibility for the preservation and organization of American government records. R.D.W. Connor became the first archivist of the United States. His inaugural administrative report, published in 1935, cataloged the state of surviving federal records with considerable thoroughness. It discussed gaps, losses, and priorities for acquisition and conservation. The 1,890 census destruction, the single largest loss of individual-level federal records in American history, a loss of 62 million documents representing an entire population's identity at a specific historical moment, is not named in that report as an object of investigation or recovery effort. 38 years after the fire, a new institution, built specifically to ask exactly this kind of question, did not ask it. The institution built to protect American memory chose not to ask what had happened to American memory's largest single loss. Connor's report is a public document. The omission is legible to anyone who reads it looking for the name of what was lost, and the omission is not the only one. In the decades following 1935, as the National Archives expanded its holdings and refined its practices, the 1,890 loss was consistently treated in institutional literature as a settled historical fact, an unfortunate accident, regrettable, unrepeatable, closed, no audit, no reconstruction attempt. No formal inquiry into the sequence of administrative decisions that left 62 million records in a wooden building while a fireproof vault sat empty. The case was closed before it was opened. And a case that is closed before it is opened is not a closed case. It is a decision about what questions a society is willing to live without answering. Alex Haley spent 12 years researching roots, published in 1976. In interviews and in the book's own methodological passages, he described the 1,890 census gap as a structural wall, a point beyond which documentary reconstruction of African American family lineage became, for most families, impossible. He was not speaking metaphorically. The genealogical firewall created by the 1890 destruction affected, by reasonable estimate, somewhere between 4 and 8 million African Americans whose family continuity crosses the legal boundary of slavery and whose identity reconstruction requires precisely the kind of individuated, address-specific, parentage-linked data that the 1,890 schedules uniquely contained. No federal reparative genealogical program has been proposed, debated, or formally introduced in Congress to address this structural gap. No federal commission has ever formally ruled on the cause of the fire, the mechanism of the destruction, or the question of whether the congressional appropriations decision of 1,894 was reviewed with the fire's outcome in mind. The absence of a ruling is itself a ruling, and the shape of that absence spanning 130 years, crossing administrations of every political character, surviving the creation of a national archive specifically mandated to address exactly this kind of loss, is a shape too consistent, too durable, and too convenient to be explained entirely by oversight. Haley's wall is still standing. It is made of ash and administrative silence, and it has never been formally named as what it is. The people on the other side of that wall, the descendants of the 62 million names, have been reconstructing their family histories from fragments, workarounds, and substitutes for 5 generations. 5 generations of people reaching backward into a gap that an official record calls accidental and that the evidence calls something else. Stand today in the National Archives reading room in Washington, D.C. The vault built in 1895 still stands nearby. The one the records were never transferred into. Its walls are thick. Its construction was sound. It was ready in the year before the fire, and it stands still, a monument to a protection that was never extended to the things it was built to protect. In Perry County, Missouri, 6,160 names sit in a microfilm canister, accessible to any researcher who requests the M407 series. The only individual faces visible through the smoke of a fire that burned for 3 days in January 1896. The Congressional Appropriations record that shows a budget line silently removed in 1894 is unclassified. It sits in an open archive. The building inspection reports are unclassified. The 1,897 congressional hearing testimony is unclassified. The 1,900 Census Instruction Manual is publicly available. None of these documents, read together in sequence, have been the subject of a formal federal inquiry. The evidence is not hidden in a sealed room. It is sitting in plain sight, in open collections, unread because the question it answers is one no institution has officially decided to ask. Every name on a census is a claim on land, on inheritance, on legal standing, on the right to say, I was here, I came from here, this place belonged to someone I can name. When you burn the names, you do not erase the people. You erase their standing. And standing, in a court of law, is everything. The fire lasted 3 days. The silence has lasted 130 years. One of those things was an accident.